Australia, the sixth largest country on Earth. An ancient, rugged, and unforgiving land with abundant animal life, both beautiful and deadly. Found within its awe-inspiring landscapes and natural beauty exists a deep history of unexplained mysteries for anyone with the courage to investigate them. Tonight, we join Ben on a journey across this vast island continent in search of answers to events that have reshaped the lives of so many that have been exposed to Unexplained Phenomena Australia, with your host, Ben Hurle.
G'day everyone, and welcome to another episode of Unexplained Phenomena Australia. And tonight I have a special guest joining me, and his name is Paul Spotiswood. Now, Paul is a very experienced pilot, he's a retired pilot, and he had the absolute pleasure of flying VH-DSJ, which was the plane that Fred Valentich disappeared in. Now, I thought that was an incredible opportunity to talk to Paul about the plane that Fred disappeared in, and also about Fred's actual disappearance as well. Being a very experienced pilot, it's going to be very interesting to hear what Paul has to say about the whole episode of Fred disappearing. So I'd like to welcome Paul onto the show. There he is. How are you?
Good. Up here in Brisbane.
Yes, that's fabulous. You're in Brisbane and I'm down in Victoria where it's freezing, hence my hoodie and cap.
Well, believe it or not, it's going down to 8 degrees Celsius here tonight.
Wow, that's cold for Brisbane, and I'm pretty sure we'll be somewhere south of that as well.
It is, Gilbert. The day today was about 22 degrees, lovely day, sunny day, and it's going to be like that again tomorrow.
Yes. Winters are still pretty good in Australia. We're not Siberia, so that's a good thing. So yeah, welcome to the show, Unexplained Phenomena Australia. It's a show where we do look at all sorts of mystery phenomena in Australia, with a particular focus on the UFO mystery. Now, one of the big things about the UFO mystery is that oftentimes pilots throughout all the decades of flight have reported strange experiences with craft of advanced ability. And the case of the Fred Valentich disappearance is the world's greatest aviation mystery, in my belief. And I think that we really do need to try and look at finding answers, if we can find answers, or at least discuss this particular encounter in great detail on a regular basis. Even after 40 years later, I still think this case is particularly relevant. And I think that with all that's going on in the world now with UFOs and more disclosure coming out, that Fred's case still needs to be right up there.
Absolutely. It really does stand out because of 5-minute, 50-second radio transmission with Steve Roby. I was speaking to Steve only this morning, and he's about 2 years older than I am. I'm 74, and he was a trained commercial pilot and instructor. And so he knew it from both sides, from flight service unit as well as from the flying side. So he could evaluate it himself. Yep. And he has made the comment to me that he believed Fred wasn't hoaxing. Something was really happening to him at that stage.
That's correct. That's correct. And I thought we might just begin with perhaps if you could give our listeners a bit of an outline on your aviation career, how it started for you, what got you into it, and your journey through that, and ultimately what led to your interest in Fred's experience.
Well, it all started when I fell in love for the first time, and I happened to be 14 at that stage.
Excellent.
And I was living in a country town in Victoria, well, about 50 kilometres southeast of Melbourne, a place called Cranbourne. It was a little country town then. And I was attending a Church of England, as it was called, and had a very good minister. And he rang up one Tuesday or Wednesday from memory and said, "Would you like to go for a fly today?" Because the minister at Dandenong, and Mr. Eggleston, had a private pilot's license, and he was going to take us, my brother and myself, and his two children down to Moorabbin and go in an old straight back Cessna 172, and never been in an aircraft. And that day changed my life, changed the direction of my life. I just was captivated with aviation, and I found out that you could learn to fly at 16. And the day I turned 16, I pestered my dad all day to take me to Moorabbin Airport. He wouldn't take me down there, and finally relented at about 4:30 in the afternoon. And I found out about learning to fly. And ironically, my dad knew Arthur Shutt, who had Shutt Flying Academy, through a business that my dad had earlier years, and through Arthur Shutt's parents' business. And so I did a medical and started on Australia Day 1965 at 16 years of age, a little 150 with hand flaps. And I had to earn the money. So it was £6 per hour, dual or solo back then. The same thing would be about $380 today, because the next year it went to dollars, doubled the pounds, $12 an hour. And so I had to earn the money, and I could only afford a lesson about every 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And so finally, I think it was August, September the 25th, 65, that as a 16-year-old, my instructor said, "Off you go," and sent me solo.
Wow.
And so the following year, at 17, I got my restricted private pilot's license, transferred from the 150 to the 172, and I asked my minister if he'd like to be my first passenger. And I thought, well, there's faith, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. That's fabulous.
A brand new license, a young and experienced pilot, and he loved flying. I took him up a couple of times. He was a great fellow, Mr. Bolt.
Excellent.
And so then when I had my restricted license in Victoria, you couldn't get a driving license till you're 18. So I had to get someone to drive me to Moorabbin so I could take them flying.
That is so strange, isn't it? You can fly before you can drive.
And I think it still is the same way. I think it's still 18 in Victoria to get a driving license, where other states are 17. Anyway, I went on and got my unrestricted, did my navigational exercises at Moorabbin, and then I found a quaint little airfield down on the beautiful Mornington Peninsula, a place called Tyab, not far from Hastings. And I went down there, and ironically, my dad knew a fellow by the name of Bill Val. My dad had a couple of racehorses that he trained himself, and Bill Val was into racing. He was a little pint-sized fellow, very game, incredible. What some of the things he did, and in aeroplanes.
Yeah.
And he had a Tiger Moth. We drove down there, and here's this little guy with his Tiger Moth, and Dad said, "Yeah, I know him." I said, "Oh, come on, Dad, you don't know him." He said, "Oh, yeah, I do." So went over, and that's how I met Bill Val. And so I went down to Thai because it was more a social thing. There was an aero club there, whereas at Shutt's, where I was learning, was just you go in, pay your money, do your flying, and go home. Anyway, Bill Val bought a Cessna 175 with a geared prop and VH-RHU, Romeo Hotel uniform. And then in 68, he bought a brand new Cessna 182L VH-DSJ.
Wow, the famous
Absolutely
plane.
spanking brand new, beautiful color scheme, two-tone blue. I think there might have been a bit of black and certainly white on it as well. And so my logbook tells me that on December the 8th and 9th, 1968, when I was just approaching 20 years of age, which I turned 20 on a couple of weeks later in January, with 150 hours, the same age, the same experience of Fred Valentich when he went missing in it some 9 years later. So here I was, I got endorsed on this beautiful 182. And of course, the difference was it had a variable pitch propeller. You could vary the pitch on the blades and the propeller, whereas the 150, 172 just was a constant, well, just a set propeller. And this to get in this 182 with more power, more go, and I did a lot of flying in DSJ. And Bill Val down at Tyab, the American dollar, we were getting something like $1.25 for each American for each dollar. Now, at the moment, it's about 66, 67 cents.
That's right.
So airplanes in Australia, it was great because we had a really good exchange rate. Fuel was cheap. Instructors were paid next to nothing because I ended up being one of them. And I think it was when I went to Canberra in 1971, my first flying job, it was $56 an hour for an instructor. And they came out, a waitress received a wage increase. They were getting $56.50. So they were getting a bit more than a commercial pilot with an instructor's rating, and they got tips. We didn't.
No.
So anyway, did lots of flying, and Bill Val, he had, or the family had, there was lots of family money, and he built a 32-unit motel, the Tyab Fly-In on the airfield, built with licensed restaurants, squash courts, swimming pool, still there and operating today. He built 2 huge hangars. He bought 3 new jet helicopters, including the Angel of Mercy, which was the first ambulance helicopter in Australia. And when they named it the Angel of Mercy, he and Dr. Reedy, that captured a lot of imagination, and Bill paid for its operation for the first year of its flight until it became backed by, I think, Peninsula Ambulance Service. And that's just gone 50 years since he set that up. Bill died some years ago, and he was a heavy smoker. And I think that I used to ring him on his birthday every year on the 15th of January. And he was pretty bad way with emphysema. So I'm glad I never started to smoke. And,
good idea.
And ironically, I went to his funeral, and that was a brand new Catholic church at Cranbourne, right across the road from where I grew up when I was till I was 5.5. And, but anyway, Bill was quite a character. He had lots of aeroplanes. After the DSJ, he bought a brand new 210 retractable undercarriage 6-seater VH-ELB. He bought a brand new Brit-Norman Islander. He had 2 Tiger Moths. He had 2 Cessna 150s, a 172 or 2 172s. And it was like an aviation Disneyland at Tyab. And DSJ was his first brand new aeroplane.
Okay, so DSJ was his first brand new aeroplane, and you were flying it out of Tyab. That's where you were flying it from when you took it up?
20 years of age, and same age as Frederick when he went on that flight.
Yep. Now, what was the plane like to fly? Like, was it a good plane to fly? And what sort of trips did you take it on? And what sort of duration were you when you were out there using it?
Well, I took it up to Mount Beauty on one occasion and landed on a ag strip. There's a member of the club, Fred Wright and Margaret Wright. They had a beautiful 177 Cardinal, and but they invited the people up to their holiday house at Mount Beauty there, and flew up there and down into the valley, up the side of the hill. There's just a one-way strip, and you round out again, you keep the power on, you touch down and you put power on to go up the hill under the power lines where it leveled off, and the takeoff coming down the other way was like a roller coaster, because once you start, you don't stop.
You don't stop. That's right.
Into the valley and around. It was fantastic because DSJ had plenty of power.
Was it? Yeah, a powerful airplane.
Powerful, lovely airplane. And Bill Val, he had a farm not far from the airfield, and he wanted someone to help go and do something with a worker over there with his sheep. So he said, take DSJ and go and land in the paddock. So I went over there, landed in the paddock, went and helped with the sheep, and then flew back. He was a one of a kind, incredible guy. Boy, oh boy, he was just a pint size, like built like a jockey. And he said to me once, he said, it's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog.
Oh, yeah.
And he was a unique character, but to have that vision to start up the Angel of Mercy helicopter service, the first one in Australia, and there I put it to the Aero Club down there, where I'm a life member, to honour this memory. And I believe that they're preparing at the moment, they've bought a similar helicopter of that model of a Bell Jet Ranger. They're having it painted up in those colours. They've put down a concrete pad. They're going to put up a pole and mount this helicopter up on the pole with the story of it, with Bill Val and Doc Reedy, the two instrumental in this. But that's the sort of guy Bill was. And I remember he took me flying over his farm there one day, and my dad, in DSJ, and it was low and fast.
Wow. Was it a four-seater plane?
Well, yes, four-seater, but in the back seat, from memory, you could squeeze an extra person in, but it'd be pretty. They'd want to be pretty small. I think there were 3 seat belts across the back.
Yeah, right.
2 in the front. But yeah, lovely airplane to fly. And ironically, I went on to fly for a real estate company out of Tyabb, and they had a new 182P. Bill's DSJ was 182L, and I flew that for a year for quite a unique character, and I even got an instrument rating in that one. And
so what years were you actually flying DSJ, and what year did you stop flying DSJ?
Oh, my logbook's over here. I could pull that out, but did lots of flying with DSJ. And there's another old mate of mine, he's in his 80s, and he, Cam Kerr, an interesting man, and he loved flying DSJ as like the same as I did. It was like a brand new 182, and it's lovely to fly, plenty of power. And of course, back in those days, to rent them, it wasn't dear like it is today. Yeah,
that's interesting, isn't it?
Well, I went to Oshkosh the first time in 11 years ago, 2012, and they were launching a brand new 182, and that was 500, I think it's $545,000 new.
Wow.
And that was 11 years ago.
That was 11 years ago.
11 years ago. I think you'd have to win the lotto to pay for it then or now.
No, that's but back then in the early 70s, it was an affordable thing to do, to hire the plane on a regular basis.
Because of this change in the dollar, fuel was cheap. The government regulations, they didn't charge you for landing fees anywhere. They didn't charge you for the maps and things that you got. They were sent out automatically. and it was far more affordable than it is today. You didn't have to have a security pass. You didn't have the things they've loaded up with. They used to say when the weight of the paperwork from the department equals the weight of the airplane, then you can go flying.
Oh, that's unbelievable. And then you went on to fly. Your flying career went a lot further after DSJ.
It did, but I've just got to wind back there. I was a failure at school. I had a real trouble, and it was never investigated. And so I left school feeling, quite. And ironically, the chairman of the school was a bloke by the name of he wasn't Sir Reginald Lancet then, but he became Sir Reginald Lancet in '69. I left in '65. And he had a big airline. There was 2 airlines back then. Well, there's Qantas, which was the overseas Australian airline, and there was TAA. They used to say TAA was Trans-Australian Airlines, or try another airline, they'd say, or Ansett Airlines of Australia, or chance it with Ansett. But it was 2 airline policy, no competition, very high fares, license to print money, and 2 characters, Rupert Murdoch and Sir Peter Abels, did a bit of a hostile takeover of Ansett, and they got control of it for a number of years there. Anyway, I was a poor student, but my love of flying precipitated me into learning how to study and pass exams. And so after I left school, I learned how to pass exams, must have passed 50 or 60 of them over a slow period of time. And I ended up with a commercial license when I was 21 in 1970. And,
so you achieved what Fred was on the cusp of achieving.
Absolutely. And I know exactly how he felt, because here I was when I got endorsed on DSJ, 20 years of age, 150 hours, and that was Fred when he disappeared. 20 years of age, 150 hours. And it's, I identify with the struggle that he was having, passing exams and whatever. And he would have got there because he had the thing that I had, was persistence.
Persistence, yes.
Driven by the love of what we were doing. And so anyway, I went on, got an instructor's rating, and I went to Canberra and got my first flying job there in '71 through a very cold winter in Canberra. And
doesn't sound like Canberra.
Returned, beautiful flying around the countryside, but very cold there, because the fellow that owned the flying seal had a fuel truck, Gordon Forrest, and I did more hours driving his fuel truck than flying his 2 aeroplanes. And so it was pretty cold, pouring fuel 2,000 feet above sea level when it was about -5. But anyway, that was interesting. And then I returned to Melbourne and worked for Bill Val in Val Air Services. And then Bill actually, he shut up his operation, kept the helicopters going, and it went over to the Peninsula Aero Club, which is still in operation today. Very successful aero club. They've actually bought the airfield over many years, and lots of operation down at a beautiful part of the world, which is on the Mornington Peninsula, French Island, Phillip Island, Port Phillip Bay, and Western Port Bay. Beautiful area to fly around.
Yeah.
And so, ironically, you might be too young to remember, I was down there, I think it was 1967, one Sunday morning. We got a call that a diver had gone missing at Portsea, and Bill Val was there. It was about 11 o'clock, 11:30 maybe. And he said, jump in the back seat of his 175 before he got DSJ, and we'll go looking for, there's Fred, Margaret Wright was in the front right-hand seat, and I think Greg Skinner was next to me. We were going to go looking for this diver. We flew on a bit of a rough day along to Portsea, down Cheviot Beach, very rough water, and there was another aeroplane, VH-EMA, Maul rocket with George Douglas flying it, and we flew down along the beach in tandem and up around, and we did a circuit around for about 40 minutes there, couldn't see anything, very rough water. got back to time to find out it was the missing Prime Minister Harold Holt.
Harold Holt, yeah, that's what I thought you were talking about. The Prime Minister who drowned off.
Prime Minister of Australia disappeared.
He just disappeared into that water and was never seen again.
Seen again.
And you were flying around looking for him.
We were there looking for him. When we got back to time, we find out we were looking for Harold Holt. We were the first two there in 2 aeroplanes searching for Harold Holt, with Bill Val flying the 175 before he traded in on the 182.
Before he got DSJ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then I flew for a real estate company in a 182, and he got paid for me to get an instrument rating, which was great. I'd already got a night VMC, that's what Fred had when he was going to King Island.
Yeah.
And night VMC only teaches you to fly in the dark on instruments, basically, but not into cloud. And then you've got to go from a class 4 night VMC rating to a class 3 or up to a class 1. And I got a class 3 on the 182. I was flying a VH-RYZ for the real estate company. And then I got for my first twin engine endorsement, which is Beechcraft Baron. Got that at Moorabbin. Then we had a very nice bloke came to the Aero Club. He was a World War II pilot, hadn't flown since, but a very successful architect by the name of Jefferson Jones. And he said to me one day, he bought this twin engine Baron. He said, "Have you got a twin engine endorsement?" I said, "No." "And you've got to do 5 hours to get your first twin endorsement." He said, "My aeroplane's down in Moorabbin. Go and put some fuel in it, get an instructor, and go and get yourself an endorsement." Very kind of him.
Yeah, that's very nice of him.
Yeah. And so then I found a job flying twin engines out of Darwin 6 months after the big cyclone, Christmas 74. Darwin was obliterated. Yeah. And I went up there on the 19th of July, 1975, and flew for a company called Sartas in either a Cessna 310 twin or a 402. And I went up there with 23 hours. I had 3,200 odd hours in singles, but 23 hours in multis. And in 10 months' time, I had 780 in command multi.
Wow.
It was maximum hours. Flew my backside off. I was even flying the Red Cross in East Timor when in the invasion happened. And I was on an island 16 miles off Dili with the Portuguese Navy that morning, Sunday morning, December the 7th, which should resonate with Americans. Sunday morning, December the 7th, 1941. Something to do with Pearl Harbor.
Pearl Harbor, yeah, exactly.
And that's and I flew out to that island with 2 doctors the day before, and I saw the silhouette of these ships coming up. And so the next morning, the Portuguese Navy said, yep, they had 7 aircraft, 5 ships and 2 submarines on radar, with the invasion happening just 16 miles away. And that day I flew back late in the afternoon. I flew back to Darwin, and an amazing day, because usually there's a fair amount of cloud over East Timor with the big mountains and everything. A beautiful, totally clear day across East Timor when I flew back to Darwin. And only 16 miles away, a pretty brutal invasion was happening.
Amazing.
Yeah. So then I was with Sartas for 10 months, and then I got the opportunity to get into the right-hand seat co-pilot on a DC-3 with Conair, or Canallans, the Outback airline. Quite an interesting history there, and a terrible ending to it all, with a suicide pilot that stole an aeroplane. Oh, it's quite a story on that one, but flew it down and crashed it into the offices, trying to kill as many people as he could.
No, that's terrible.
It was terrible thing. And it took out the chief pilot, who was Eddie Canellan's son, 33-year-old son. It was terrible. And
that's terrible.
Terrible history. But anyway, I had some good years flying on the DC-3, 32 passengers, freight, mail and baggage, 8 sectors a day across the top end, all the different Aboriginal settlements. And then I got into a 4-engine Heron, and which was only 6 de Havilland Heron. Prince Philip used to fly one, the same.
Yeah.
But Eddie did Eddie Cannellan did an amazing conversion, a Riley conversion of this on the Heron, putting lightweight like homing engines, 4 engines on, and taking the old Gypsy Queens, heavy Gypsy Queens off, much lighter engines, a little more power.
Yeah.
And they were really good performing and did a great job in the territory in the outback when I was flying. Then we were taken over by East West Airlines, and it became Northern Airlines, and I got a command, well, I had a command on the Heron and got a command on a Metro liner, and did a great trip to America over the July 4th weekend in 1980, where I did the ground school for the Metro liner and the simulator, and came back and got endorsed in Darwin. So I was on the same sort of route as Fred would have been on.
Would have been if he had have continued. Given all your flight experience, many hours in lots of different aircraft, lots of different weather, lots of different situations, lots of different pressures, what's your take on Fred's experience in VH-DSJ? Given the fact that you've flown the plane, you know the plane and its capabilities, what do you make of what happened to Fred on the 21st of October?
I aligned myself, ironically, very much like Fred and his experience and his enthusiasm and his battle passing the exams and things like that. I just think, well, we were on very similar path at that age, even though we're about 9 years difference in age. Fred would have been quite capable. I instructed people in night VMC flying. I know exactly what they have to do. They've said, some people have said, oh, he got disorientated, he spun in a little bit like JFK Jr., which I watched that on a YouTube just recently, and they found that mangled aeroplane in the water. But that didn't happen to Fred. It wasn't quite dark. He would have had a horizon.
Yeah, he still had about 10 or 15 minutes of daylight, I think.
No, there's no perfect flying conditions.
Yeah.
And there's no way he lost it. And you don't speak on the radio for 5 minutes, 50 seconds when you're disoriented.
No, you don't.
You're in within a minute.
Exactly. That's right. And you wouldn't give any credence to him flying upside down. I don't think that's.
Well, he had aerobatic experience.
Yeah.
So he knew what was straight and level and what was upside down.
Yeah.
And he's describing something quite unusual that's happening to him.
Yes.
Yeah, and so anyway, he was a competent, and okay, he had 150 hours thereabouts. So okay, he's got some reasonable experience, not a lot, but enough to do that flight.
Yeah. So you don't think it was beyond him by any means to do that flight?
Not at all.
No,
not at all.
It would have been well within his capability.
And the only difference is when I did my night VMC rating out of Canberra, you're flying over some pretty rugged country, but the good thing is you can't see it because it's in the dark.
Yeah.
And if anything happened and you went down, well, good luck.
Yeah.
Because you don't know where you'll end up. Or if you had the landing light on, you might be lucky and get a paddock, or you might put it between 2 trees. Who knows? And with Frederick, he's flying over water. Well, you can ditch. You could ditch reasonably safely in water. You want to have your safety belt tied up pretty well.
Yeah.
But that didn't happen to Frederick because nothing was found.
No, and if he was descending, that's something that he could have easily prepared for, and he would have told Steve Roby that I am descending here and I'm going to end up in the water.
At no stage did he give a distress call, which is, say, a pan call, which is basically clear the airways. I've got a problem, but it hasn't gone to an emergency. An emergency happens when it's Mayday, Mayday, Mayday.
Yeah.
And so there was no Mayday call. All there was a pretty professional string of communication transmissions. At no time did he say, there's a UFO. He said, there's another aircraft.
Yes, he always called it an aircraft.
Tell Steve Roby all about this, and Steve's trying to help him as well as he can. No, there's no aircraft in your area. And then he finally says something like, and anyone can look up on the internet, the transcript between Frederick and Steve Roby.
Yes.
And he says, my engine is rough idling. That aircraft is now hovering above me. And no, it's not an aircraft.
Yeah, that's very interesting. That's the point where he does make that distinction.
So what is it?
Yeah, so what is it? And when he says my engine's rough idling at 23, 24, what does he mean by that?
Yeah, that's standard cruise power, 23 inches of manifold pressure, 2,400 revs. Standard cruising power in a 182. And
so would it be unusual for a plane to be coughing at that setting? Would it be unusual for a plane to be acting like that?
In the 3,000 odd hours that I had in single engine airplanes, I had one, a Cessna 150, blow an engine up. There 4 cylinders opposing the 2 and 2, and the one on the right hand side, it had been using a bit of oil, so there was a bit of a warning there. And one day I was out with a student, and just not long before, he said, what are we going to practice today? Forced landings? I said, no, steep turns. Well, he was right, because it blew the cylinder off. I've still got it in the garage. Blew it, and it went bang, 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 boom. The prop stopped like that. And okay, taking over.
Yeah.
And we're only at 1,500 feet, and I'm looking at my side to see where we can go. And it's all bracken and trees, and the gravity of the situation has taken over, and so we're heading down. And he said, "Oh, there's a paddock my side," and I thought, well, he hasn't learned forced landings yet. He mightn't know. So I'm still looking my side, and I said, "Give us a look." We rolled it over a little bit. Oh, they'll have to do. And so there were the big power lines on the approach.
Yeah.
So I had to do a left-hand circuit, which you can't see very well because that's where it was. And we're going down about 1,200 feet by then. Yeah. And then around over the power lines and side slip it into the field. It was a cow paddock. And rounded out, held right off, full stall landing. And it was a bit of a rough paddock. And I went, bum, 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 stop. The airplane stopped, but that's when our knees started shaking.
Yeah, I bet. So
and we got out, no further damage.
That's quite a tale. So Fred's engine was behaving like it should have been at the altitude he's at 4,500 feet.
Except 24. He said, my engine is now rough idling, which is not a normal thing in a Cessna.
No. Yeah.
The only one they've ever had is that 150. That blew the cylinder off, or blew it in half. And but for Fred, no, there's something else occurring. Now that wasn't the end of it, because there was 5 minutes 50 seconds transmission, followed by a 17-second metallic sound being transmitted.
What do you make of that sound? That sound's out there. People can listen to it. It's online. You can hear it. Is that anything that you'd hear in an aircraft?
The only way you can get something to transmit is to hold the microphone button in.
Yeah.
So for whatever reason, he's got to be holding the mic when whatever's been picked up by the microphone and being transmitted out is occurring.
And even further word. No, exactly. And even at that point, his last word is Melbourne. He's not in any kind of panic. There's no type of distress. His voice is as measured and as considered and as problem-solving as it is from when he first talks to Steve Roby. So it doesn't indicate that at that point that there was even imminent disaster.
You can hear a little bit more stress in his voice, and the words, and sorry, and possibly things not being completely said, a couple of times. But you can understand he's distracted, quite distracted.
Do you think he would hold back on? Do you think he would hold back on description?
I thought he was very professional.
Yeah.
People said he was a UFO fanatic. I don't believe he was.
No.
Now, back, I was working in the Cranbourne Hotel in about 1968, 69, when Eric von Daniken put out the book Chariots of the Gods. And there were a lot of people were talking about it. Wow, the mystery of these things, how did they come to be?
Yeah.
Quite incredible, thought-evoking, to try and work out how could they build these pyramids? How could they move these stones? Why would these things be on Easter Island or South America or wherever they were? People were questioning it. Then they came up with the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And that evoked another response of what on earth could be out in that huge universe. And so people were seeking, and I was speaking to Rhonda Rushton, Frederick's 16-year-old girlfriend, nearly 17. She was going to turn 17 in the December. Yes. And I said, did you consider Fred to be a UFO fanatic? She said, not at all. We only spoke about it once. They went up there at Mount Dandenong, which is a beautiful view down over Melbourne, and looking at the universe and everything. And they were just discussing it. And someone said that he had a UFO scrapbook, things in the paper he'd cut out and stick in this scrapbook. And she said, I never saw it. I never heard about it.
No.
And if anyone would have known if there was a scrapbook, but people make up some crazy things, as she learnt from the way the press treated her.
Yes.
And there's only one group that treated her decently, and she's commented to me about how well they treated her, but the rest didn't. It was pretty shameful.
Yeah. The whole thing got twisted and blown out, and some really crazy theories around Fred disappearing to South America or flying,
drug
running, center of Australia, suicide,
airplane. Yeah, this bloke had just got 20 years of age. He's very keenly in love, madly in love with Rhonda, but known her for 6 months. Yeah. Had got secretly engaged 8 days before.
Yeah.
Rhonda's even shown me the ring that he gave her, pending paying off an engagement ring, which was going to be produced just before Christmas, and they were going to announce it to both families.
Yes.
But they get engaged then and wait another year until she's 18, and then they would marry.
Yeah.
This is not the actions of a suicidal pilot.
No, or a drug runner.
Stealing an airplane. And he was very, very straight-laced. And I sort of think I was very much like this. You do things correctly. You dot every I and you cross every T, and that's how we're taught in aviation, to make it safe. Not taking risks.
I've got one other thing I want to ask you too. Like, if VH-DSJ had have ended up in the water, how long would it float for? How long would you expect a Cessna to stay? A point where it can be seen.
Well, he left with a full tanks, 5 hours fuel, and he would have used about 1 hour by when he disappeared. So, if those tanks were ruptured and fuel is lighter than water, of course, that has a tendency to float. If the tanks were empty, there may have been, some floating time. I don't think, if he managed to ditch it, it wouldn't stay afloat too long. It would go down, but I would have thought it would be pretty well damaged, and there would be bits and pieces. There might be life jackets, there might be maps. There'd be fuel, there'd be oil, there would be some trace, but it disappeared without trace.
And from my understanding, they started looking for him immediately.
Well, it was late in the day, so they wouldn't have gone too well that night, but certainly the next day for at least 4 or 5 days, and they covered 2,400 square kilometres apparently. But it would have been pretty well localised, and you could certainly work that out. From when he left Cape Otway Lighthouse heading south-southeast, it was 12 minutes at 125 knots. So 12 minutes, 120, 60, he might have been 50 to 60 miles from Cape Otway.
Not going to float. A very localized area to search if you're going to find
a very localized area. If in fact he ended up in water.
Now, interestingly enough, you found another case in 1969 where another plane had reported engine trouble in a very eerily similar way to which Fred had disappeared. I never heard about this before either.
This is a strange thing, because when I was flying down at Tyab in 68, 69, and then you hear of accidents and you say, oh God, what happened there? And it was, ironically, it was just Christmas Eve, 24th of December 1969. And it was a Fuji aircraft, only 1 year old, so it wouldn't have been, it would be pretty new and in pretty good condition. And
no reason for a problem.
A 29-year-old pilot by the name of Peter Phillips was flying it from Moorabbin, same flight that Fred was doing, but he arrived at King Island, and I believe he had passengers. I don't know how many, because it's only a 4-place low-wing aircraft. And he was flying back to Cape Otway before turning right and heading back up the coast to Moorabbin. And he reported his engine was running rough, and I believe he was only about 8 miles or kilometres, but not that far from Cape Otway. And when he reported, he was still above 1,000 or going through 1,000 on descent, but he got that radio call out, and I don't even know if it was a Mayday call, what it was, but he disappeared without trace in a similar area to Frederick. Now, when that struck me I heard it on the news. They didn't make a big deal of it. Pilot and a Fuji airplane's gone missing. And nothing much. Christmas Day the next day, nothing much. There might have been a search. You just say, well, what a coincidence. That's 1969. 9 years later, Frederick, and the difference was Frederick's 5-minute 50 radio transmission with Steve Roby.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's an interesting comparison between the two cases.
And you just go, wow. And when, of course, Frederick disappeared, that really made something of that one, but it's well forgotten. I've searched the internet, very little on it. I found the registration of the actual aeroplane, that was VH Foxtrot Juliet Kilo. There's very little information. I'd love to see an accident report or a missing report. The thing is, if you find nothing and you haven't got a body, there's not even a death for 8, 9, 10 years.
Exactly. It's a missing person.
They couldn't even get into his bank accounts or anything after that period of time that he would have been declared deceased with no other proof other than time. So that was quite a strange one. That really resonated with me in the light of, and I was up the Northern Territory flying when I heard about DSJ and Frederick. And ironically, and I wrote an article for the Peninsula Aero Club newsletter for the 40th anniversary of the disappearance of Frederick. and they published it there with the whole thing. And then 2 months later to the day, I wrote another one about an incredible sighting, which was in New Zealand, 4-engine Argosy freighter, big heavy turboprop, flying newspapers between the islands. And they had an incredible sighting, which was caught on radar in New Zealand as well. And so a bloke by the name of Quentin Fogarty, a Melbourne Channel 10, O10.
I think it was Channel O at the time.
Yeah, he happened to be in New Zealand. I asked him to go and interview some of these pilots, and he went on a similar flight on the 31st of December, and he took a camera crew and a sound recordist, and that night they saw the UFOs again and got it on camera, and that changed Quentin Fogarty's life. And he said to the captain, "Let's hope they're friendly."
Yeah.
Which was the title of his book.
Yes, it's a good book too. Yes, worth tracking down.
And of course, the authorities then boo-hoo it all and try to talk it down, say it's squid boats with lights on, or it's reflection of moonlight off cabbages, or pilots say these blokes have been flying for years. These big airplanes, they know what's normal, they know what's not normal.
That's correct. They do. They're up there all the time.
No, you should have seen what we saw.
Yeah.
It was not normal. The Air Force blokes got it on radar, air traffic controllers, and other sightings as well. And that was ironically the first one 2 months to the day after Frederick disappeared.
Yeah, and look, so if you just took Fred Valentich's experience in isolation, that's one thing. But around that time, across the whole of Victoria and Tasmania, there were many UFO reports on the day prior to the day of the disappearance, and then in the days after his disappearance, there was a whole level of different reports that provide this whole background to supporting Fred's 5 minutes in the air with Steve Roby. And you've had the Roy Manifold photograph that was taken on the same night. That came out also as a big story at the time, of this very unusual object that he had actually been able to photograph. And I've got that here. I'll just pop that up briefly. That's the famous photograph that Roy Manifold took, and of a very unusual.
That's number 6, but number 4 had a disturbance. He had 6 photos on a time lapse.
Yes.
The number 4 had a disturbance in the water.
Yeah.
And not the right color scheme, but it looks pretty close. That one's not at 182, but
we'll go back to that one then.
That's more like, I'd say the 172 or a 182, but it was certainly DSJ. And so you say, then there was the year after I started flying, April the 4th, I think it's a Tuesday or Wednesday morning, at the Westall High School, not far from Moorabbin Airport, where there was up to 140 witnesses. That there were 3 UFOs, whatever they don't. We don't know whether they're terrestrial or extraterrestrial.
Yeah.
And they could be either one.
Yeah.
And a girl ran into a science class and said, Mr. Greenwood, there are flying saucers outside. And anyway, they all ran out, and they saw there were 3 of them. And they were pretty excited. And there was a stand of trees just past the school. And these girls ran past the stand of trees, and one of these had landed there. And one girl got within meters of it.
Yeah, real close encounter. That's the Westall 66
high school
case. Yes, the high school. I know a lot of those witnesses.
Yep.
Yeah, very. And they had Cessnas in the air at that time. Apparently, there was Cessnas up flying around looking for these objects.
I find that very, very strange indeed, because it's very close to the Moorabbin Circuit area, and you wouldn't be doing your own thing flying around. I found that thing I have big question marks over why that description of Cessnas. It could have been that they're in the circuit area of Moorabbin because it's just not far away.
No, it's pretty close.
But I'd certainly not looking at these UFOs, because if they had been, that would have been reported somehow. But when Mr. Greenwood, and they've even got him on YouTube, if you look up the Westall High School incident, and he's an elderly man now, or when it was taken, and he said, then the men in black suits or dark suits came around and said, Mr. Greenwood, we don't want you talking about this, because if you talk about it, we're going to say you were drinking on duty and you'll lose your job. And he tells that.
Yeah, he
But
does.
these kids, the teachers, they certainly saw something.
Yes, 100%. They
landed,
did.
and that's a very credible sighting of something terrestrial or extraterrestrial. We don't know which way it can go.
No, that's a whole conversation in and unto itself, the Westall case. But thanks very much for joining me this week, Paul, on the show. We've reached our time limit, and I really appreciate your insights into the Fred Valentich encounter from an aviation perspective, and of course your unique perspective of having actually been very familiar with and flown VH-DSJ. So that's an incredible experience to have, to know that plane so well.
As I keep reminding Rhonda Rushton, the last chapter hasn't been written yet.
Exactly right. That's true.
We live in hope.
Yeah. So just stay on the air there, Paul, and I'm just going to close up the show. And thanks to everybody who's listening, who's watched and listened in today. I hope you really enjoyed Paul's contribution. I know I did. It was fascinating, and I thank him very much for joining us. And until next week, we'll be back again, and we'll be exploring the strange world that is the Australian paranormal experience, and particularly UFOs. So thanks for joining me again, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.